Nice to see such a crowd for a second night of our Trottier Public Science Symposium. I think we have a lot more of a senior crowd tonight than we had last night, looking to be less senior. Well, we'll see what we can do for you tonight. But first, I would like to introduce Dr. Bruce Lennox, who's the Dean of Science. More important than that, he's also a chemistry professor. And he will have some opening remarks on behalf of McGill.
Thank you, Joe. I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight on behalf of McGill University and the Faculty of Science for this second night of the Longing for Longevity, this year's Trottier Public Science Symposium. I'm delighted that the Faculty of Science is able to host this event and the Symposium series, a series that's been now running for 10 consecutive years, thanks to Lauren Trottier and the Trottier Family Foundation. The Trottier Symposium, in its 10 years, has proven to be a key element in the promotion of science and science communication and presenting scientific information to the public. This is precisely why the McGill Office for Science and Society is the appropriate group to organize this event. This is the 20th year of the Office for Science and Society, something that's really quite a landmark in public science outreach in the world. The office, of course, has a national and international presence in its mission to separate, and this is their mission, to separate sense from nonsense on the scientific stage. So last night, we heard about cosmetics and the numerous anti-aging claims, as well as aging and the concept of treating aging as a disease. Tonight, we'll hear from the legendary Dr. Ruth Westheimer, who will be speaking on the subject of sex after 50. So at dinner, I assured her that because we're a university, there's going to be a lot of note-taking tonight. But not probably for the obvious reasons. And I guess the reasons why students, because you're all students here tonight, there's always a test. This is just going to be a different test. But the important thing is, just like all McGill students, everyone here is gearing up to be future ready. And that's what's really important. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce Dr. Joe Schwarcz, who's the director of the McGill Office for Science Society, who will speak a bit about longing for longevity, and will then introduce our guest speaker. Joe.
Thanks very much. As Professor Lennox mentioned, this symposium has been ongoing now for a number of years. We've been organizing it for 10 years. And it has been our tradition to make it somewhat of a memorable event for Lauren, who has been so good at funding us. And we try to come up every year with a memento so that he remembers the year. And we've kind of done the same thing every year. We come up with a plaque which has the poster for that year's event and some kind of meaningful quote on the bottom. And this time it's a quote from Robert Browning, the famous British poet. And it says, "Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be." So said Robert Browning, who must have been clowning. But this is what he said. And so, Lauren, I'd like you to come and accept this.
I'll just make one quick comment here. This symposium started in 2004, so if I'm counting right, that would be about 15 or 16 of these things that I've collected. And we've been running out of space. So I'm glad to say my wife bought a new kind of case, and we got extra room for that. So thank you. good.
So the program for tonight, I'm going to try to inform and entertain you for a little while, and then we will introduce Dr. Ruth. And Dr. Ruth will sign books, if you so wish, at the end. Please do not come up to the stage when we finish. She will go outside. There's a table set up, and she's happy to sign the books. I think she can even take pictures with you, but there's no kissing allowed, I was told. Okay, let's get going. Let me introduce you to Madame Jean Kalman. Why is she so interesting? This lady was born in 1875, and she aged very gracefully. At the age of 115, she decided to give up smoking because she said she wanted to live a long time. And believe it or not, she went on to live until 1997, passed away at 122, and she now defines the human lifespan, which is different from the life expectancy. Life expectancy is what the average person can expect to live from the moment of birth. The lifespan is the maximum amount that any member of the species has ever lived. So therefore, it is achievable because it has happened only once, but it has happened. So it's possible to make it happen again. And this, of course, is what researchers are working towards. And yesterday, you heard from Dr. Sinclair about the exciting work that he has been doing in this area. And the area, of course, is to approach the long span from the longevity. Right? So we want to expand the average life expectancy to the lifespan. The question is, what do we do? How do we stretch out our years? Well, that's one way to do it, because exercise, of course, is critical. It is better than any medication. There's absolutely no question that exercise is good for any disease, and it is certainly good for longevity. Now, over the years, of course, there have been all kinds of anti-aging regimens. We can go back in history to the time of King David. And he got some very interesting advice. When he got old and he was getting sick, he was told to go and lie with young women. Yeah, I guess some of you like that advice. It probably did have certain rejuvenating effect. The ancient Romans had their own idea. They took Vestal virgins who were made to sleep in a room without any air circulation, and in the morning, men would come and open up a little window to the room and inhale the exhaled air of these young women. And that supposedly had a rejuvenating effect, or so the Romans claimed. Then there were the ancient Chinese. And Jie Hong, in the 4th century, recommended a medicine that was made from herbs and from monkey brains. And he said it would lengthen life up to 500 years. Apparently, he only lived about 40. And then, in the Middle Ages, researchers focused on urine. This is a classic picture of an alchemist, Hennig Brand, who thought that longevity was to be found in urine. Now, one would think that's a very bizarre place to look for the miracle of longevity. How did this happen? Well, the alchemists, of course, were interested in gold. Now, when that topic comes up, people think they were interested in gold. They wanted to convert base metals into gold in order to reap the monetary rewards. But that was a small part of the issue, because to them, gold was the eternal metal. It would never tarnish. It would never get old. So they thought that if they could somehow find the secret of gold, that could also be turned into the secret of longevity for humans. What they really searched for was what they called the philosopher's stone. Well, they thought that it could be found in urine because urine had a gold color. And Henning Brandt had an idea. He thought that people were born with a fixed amount of gold in their body. And slowly, we peed our life away. So he wanted to find the secret. So he took a vat of urine and he boiled it down. And the sun went down. And in the darkness, this vat of urine began to glow. He thought for sure he had found the secret of life. No, he had found phosphorus. It was the way this element was discovered. And then, not much later, a German physician by the name of Hoffmann had another interesting idea. He thought that laughter was critical for healthy aging. And I think we have a lot of documented evidence for that. But he also believed in youth, sleep in the proximity of youth, he thought. And interestingly enough, he gave us another bit of advice. He was one of the first proponents of a vegan or vegetarian diet. And he thought that this, I guess together with lying with young women, was the key to longevity. One needs to do a controlled experiment along those lines. And today, of course, we are very interested in this notion, and we are focusing on what is the best kind of nutrition for longevity. And then in the 1800s, when science started to be more serious, along came Charles Brown-Séquard, a professor of physiology. And he didn't focus on nutrition, he didn't focus on the brain, he didn't focus on the heart. He focused on a rather different part of the mammal's anatomy, and that was this. And he realized that when animals lost this vital organ, they aged very quickly. He also noticed that men who had been castrated for one reason or another had all kinds of health problems after. So he thought that an extract of the glands of dogs would have some rejuvenating features. And the hucksters immediately jumped on this. And all of a sudden, they were selling extracts under Brown-Séquard's name. Well, Brown-Séquard himself was very interesting because he believed in his theory. And when he was getting rather elderly, he did marry a young lady. And he thought that he might not be able to come up to her needs. So he did inject himself with extracts of animals, including dogs and monkeys. He was then followed by Serge Voronov. Serge Voronov was a physician, so certainly had scientific background, and he thought, well, maybe there's a better technique than just injecting the extracts of the glands. Why not transplant the gland itself? But where do you get testicular glands to transplant? So he made a deal with the French government for executed criminals. And he harvested their organs and transplanted them. But pretty soon, they ran out of executed people. So there was a need for others, but there weren't human volunteers standing in line to be donors for this. So he actually raised monkeys. He had a monkey farm in Italy. And he raised the monkeys, he harvested their gonads, and he transplanted them into men. And he performed hundreds of these operations with very few complications. Because, in fact, he never connected anything. He just put the testicular parts into the scrotum. So the men were happy. The monkeys, not so much. And interestingly enough, one of the classic Sherlock Holmes stories written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who of course was a physician, was The Adventure of the Creeping Man. And Conan Doyle did not believe in this technology. He thought that this was pushing science beyond the borders where it should be. So in this story, Sherlock Holmes is called into the case when an elderly professor of physiology is found in the backyard swinging from a tree limb from limb. And it turned out, of course, that he had gotten this this monkey transplant and made a monkey of himself. So this was sort of a parody of that story. And this was Conan Doyle's commentary on this research having been inappropriate. And then along came Eugene Steinach. another physician, who believed that rejuvenation lay in cutting off the spermal duct, that this would then force the testes to produce more of whatever they were producing. I mean, at that time, they really didn't know much about hormones, but he thought that this would force the testes to produce more. And he got a lot of publicity on this. He was termed the youth wizard because he performed this operation over 1,000 times. And there were a lot of men who anecdotally said that they felt a lot better. And he even had pictures, dogs, that he had transplanted the glands into, or that he had tied off the spermal duct. And he even had human pictures. In this case, the man, he did his, basically it was a partial vasectomy is what he did. And there were a lot of men who subjected themselves to this procedure, including Freud. He was followed in the United States by John Romulus Brinkley, and what a fascinating character he was. He bought himself a medical degree, which you could do in those days. In fact, even today, you can go to some quack institute and buy yourself a medical degree. McGill is not one of those. So he became a physician, and he saw that there was a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but how to get to it. He had grown up on a farm, and he had witnessed the antics of goats. He saw that they were rather horny, and he thought that goat glands would be ideal for transplantation. So he became known as the goat gland transplant doctor. Over 1,700 times, he put a goat testicle into a human scrotum, hoping to rejuvenate people. One of the most interesting stories came from a farmer who had come to him complaining that his wife suggested he was kind of a flat tire. And so Brinkley did what Brinkley did. He inserted the goat gland. And a year later, he got a letter from the farmer saying how much better he felt. He felt rejuvenated. And not only that, he had been able to father a son. And he decided to call the son Billy. So we kind of smirk at this, as we should. But remember, this was very early days of science. But you know what? This really was the beginning of hormonal research. Because what these people were doing, unintentionally or unknowingly, was using testosterone, which is, of course, the hormone that is produced by the testes. And today, obviously, this is a prescription product that is used along with women with estrogen. And this sort of silly science now has hard roots to it. But it goes beyond that. Today, researchers are looking at telomeres. Telomeres are the ends of the chromosomes. This is a coil of DNA, and every time a cell divides, there's disturbance of the end of the chromosome, and the belief is that if somehow you could prevent that, you could slow down aging. Very real possibility, and in 2009, a Nobel Prize was awarded for this kind of research. And Jacques Shostak is a McGill graduate, and we've had many McGill laureates who are McGill graduates. There's tremendous interest these days in senescent cells. These are cells that no longer multiply properly, but they still secrete chemicals that are damaging to tissues. And there's a lot of exciting research now. Most of it comes from animals, but scientists have now found a way to kill off these so-called senescent cells. And there's some really exciting research in mice, although, of course, we always say, but mice are not men. But mammals, have very similar biochemical properties. And they've been able to kill off these senescent cells and make the animals live longer. Even more interesting, they've injected these senescent cells into young mice. And then the young mice aged very quickly. They became less energetic. They were less capable of going along wires and losing their balance. And then they injected a drug that destroyed these senescent cells that had been injected, and the mice regained their youth. their energy, and they were once again able to balance on wires. It's really quite interesting. Scientists, as you heard yesterday, are also looking into calorie restriction. And this seems to be just about the only scientifically documented way to live longer. Because it turns out that when you have a limited access to energy, the body goes into sort of a fight or flight situation, and it redirects its energy, takes it away from reproduction towards maintenance and repair. Now, there's controversy about just how extensive this calorie restriction should be, but one method that seems to work, and that is the so-called 16-hour fast, where the idea is to eat all of your meals within an 8-hour period. And it doesn't matter when you select that 8-hour period, but any time of the day, as long as you don't eat for 16 hours. Of course, it has to be a nutritionally sound diet. It doesn't mean that you're just eating half a hamburger or half a hot dog. But we have some very interesting human evidence for this, that you can have the possibility of increasing your longevity. Now, I say the possibility because we don't really have trials that have measured to see whether or not these people live longer, but they have done studies where through blood samples, you can take a look at the health of their DNA by looking at something that David Sinclair talked about yesterday, the methylated DNA. So one can calculate the biological age, and people who do this regimen certainly have been shown to have a lower biological age. You also heard yesterday from Dr. Sinclair about these chemicals called NAD boosters, and he's, of course, working on these. NAD is a very important molecule in biochemistry, and we're going to learn a lot about this. So, the whole point here is that there is a rather bright light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to increasing our longevity. No, we're not going to cheat death. That's not going to happen. You don't get out of life alive. But the idea is to put off death to the very last minute, right? We want to have a healthy expansion of our life expectancy. So getting back to Jean Kalman, who I told you passed away at the age of 122, but 121, she recorded a compact disc, which of course in those days was the way to record. And remember, she was born in the 1800s when there was no sound recording whatsoever. So she went through everything. She went through the Edison cylinders, then she went through discs, then tapes, and all of this in her lifetime. What a lifetime that is. Well, on this disc, she was interviewed by a reporter and, of course, was asked to what she attributed her longevity. And she had some interesting ideas. She said she ate 1 kilo of chocolate every week. Not every day, every week, 1 kilo of chocolate. And as you can imagine, the media got a hold of this, and they just loved it. And then they said, what about sex? And she said, yes, have it as often as you can. And then the reporter asked, and how often is that? And she said, I can't remember. But a British study recently showed that sex can slow aging. A British study showed. So what do we do about this? Is this legitimate? Is it true that we can do something about slowing aging by performing sex? Because we know that as you get older, there are various problems that emerge. How can we counter those, right? Well, I think that's why we are here tonight, to find out. And we're going to find that out from a legend, from an icon. Dr. Ruth Westheimer, who I don't think needs much of an introduction because, judging by looking out at the age of the audience, many of you have grown up with Dr. Ruth's wisdom and have listened to her on radio, have watched her on TV, have seen her interviewed numerous times on every talk show that exists. So when we say that she's a legend, she truly is. And there's a movie that was made about her life. Ask Dr. Ruth. It's a wonderful movie. It is available on iTunes. You can rent it or buy it on iTunes. And those of you who have Hulu, you can watch it on Hulu. For those of you who don't, let me give you a preview.
This television program contains explicit sexual language and may not be suitable for all viewers. The host is Dr. Ruth K. Westheimer.
Hello?
You're not going to believe this woman. She has a deep German accent and she talks about sex. And I think we should do something with her.
In the early 80s, people did not talk about sexuality.
You have a certain list of words you can't say. Well, we said them.
And then let him insert his penis into the vagina from behind.
We didn't think it would explode like it did.
And then, of course, you got our own television shows.
Before I started to do television, the most important thing for me was education. While I was studying, I was a single mother. I got a position at Planned Parenthood, and I loved it. I never compromised, even when it was not popular.
Ruth, I'm placing you under arrest.
Are there parts of your past that you don't like to talk about?
Of course.
She's had a lot of tragedies in her life.
Having been raised with no family around, there was no place on earth for me.
She was a young child living in Frankfurt, Germany, when the Nazis came to power.
Because of my background as a German Jewish refugee, I had a sensitivity for the people who were regarded as subhuman.
Ruth started to shift awareness of HIV and AIDS.
There is no such thing as retiring for me. Hello? Say the word sex with more emotion. I have an obligation to live large and make a dent in this world. At 90, still talking about sex from morning till night.
Look at all the people who want to hear.
I like that.
All right, this is going to be a first for me as well for one reason. You know, I've prided myself, I've been teaching for 40 years and prided myself, never in a lecture have I used the word of notes, but never have interviewed Dr. Ruth. So I thought it would be wise to come up with some questions to ask rather than just rely on memory. Obviously, you've answered.
First of all, wait.
Yes.
Wait. In my typical way,
I've been told I have to follow instructions. Yes.
In my inimitable way, what I love is look at this spread of ages. Young people, older people, last night and tonight. That's really remarkable. So I want to tell the McGill people that I will, if asked, I will come again. You. And you are doing something which you did just now, that in the Talmud, in the Jewish tradition, it says, a lesson taught with humor is a lesson retained. Everybody here remembers professors who were able to use humor, and they walked out of that classroom remembering. You can tell me a joke, I probably will not get the point, but I did get your points here, and that's a wonderful presentation. I think if we could, McGill, listen carefully, you and I should go on a tour.
Okay. You obviously have answered thousands and thousands of questions on the radio, on TV, public lectures such as this. Do you remember the first question you were asked on the radio, whenever the first time that you were on with a live person on the radio and you said, hello, this is Dr. Ruth, what's your question?
Yes, I do. And this was first the radio program on WYNY, NBC Radio. It was first 15 minutes, a quarter after midnight. And people called, and I answered. And I do remember that the very first call was from a young man in high school in the States. And he said that he feels that he's attracted to members of his own sex. If he tells his parents, they're going to kick him out of the house. That was in the 80s. And what should he do? He's in high school. I said, keep your mouth shut. Don't tell anybody. Finish high school. Go to a university where there are many people, to a large university, so that you can find other people being attracted to men. And then go to a large city, and you will find other people like you. And guess what? And I do remember that young, now not so young anymore, man, I was in a restaurant in New York, and a waiter said, Dr. Ruth, before you leave, I have to talk to you. I went to a corner, which I do very often, and he said, I called you and I listened to you. I kept my mouth shut. I went to a large university in Indiana. I came to New York City. You saved my life. And I remember that call until today. I didn't say you have to confront. I didn't say you have to tell your family that they have to accept. Nothing of the sort. I said, what's going to work for you is to keep your mouth shut and to do what I just told you.
My first question on the radio wasn't nearly as impactful. Because my first question, this goes back 40 years, was, is it safe to lick your balls? But
yourself or somebody else?
No, the guy forgot a very important word, which was golf. Because as I found out, golfers have the habit of picking up their golf ball and kissing it before hitting it for good luck. And he was worried about pesticides on the golf course getting into his body. That was my first experience. Anyway, that brings us to my next question is, you obviously have had some very strange questions on the radio or on TV. I know that one that's in the movie, where a gentleman said that he can only have an erection if his partner is wearing high heels, right? Any others like that?
Oh, plenty of others like that. However, it was very fortunate that I was able to do a radio program and that I was very well trained. I had a mentor, Dr. Helen Singer-Kaplan, and I was well trained. And then in New York, it was fortunate, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, what has happened to her could only have happened in the United States. I'm saying what happened to me on radio and later television could only have happened in New York, because New York accepts people, refugees, people with accents, so that accent of mine was accepted. Now, it's very funny. Some years ago, there was a play by Marc Saint-Germain, and Deborah Jo Rapp played me. And it's very interesting, because in those days, they told me, if you want to do radio, you have to take speech lessons. I made $1 an hour. I was a single mother, which you can see in the movie. There was no way that I could have paid a speech therapist. Guess what? Deborah Jo Rapp had to take a speech therapist to learn my accent. So the radio program really took on because there was a need. It also was at the time when people did not accept sexual practices.
I mean, you were really the first one to use such explicit language on the radio. And of course, we see that in the movie where someone asked if it's true that a woman has only a set number of orgasms in her body, and that you can draw on these, but eventually the bank runs out.
I said right away, hold it. don't believe in such nonsense. And then I went on to talk about the issue of sexuality. And then, interesting, you just mentioned Freud. Sigmund Freud should have taken a course with me. Because Freud was, with all of his brilliancy, he was sexually illiterate. He did us women a tremendous disservice because he said as if sex was only for you men and that there was nothing in it for women. And mainly, he did us a disservice because he said that any woman who needs clitoral stimulation in order to have an orgasm is an immature woman. That was a catastrophe because all women need that clitoris is going to be stimulated either during intercourse or before or after. And I had many questions of women thinking that they are immature women because they needed that clitoris to be stimulated. So Freud, with all of his being such a genius, did us women a tremendous disservice. And at this wonderful university here, loud and clear, that the clitoris is always a part of that sexual satisfaction and needs to be stimulated either by him or in a lesbian relationship by her or by the woman herself in masturbating, which is very important when we talk later about older women.
I just learned a new term here, sexual illiteracy. And we talk a lot about scientific illiteracy, but I like that term. I hope I never hear it. But now, I know that over the years you have met presidents, you have met actors, you have met actresses, you were interviewed, everyone from Johnny Carson on to Jimmy Fallon. You met George Burns, Burt Reynolds. Who stands out in your mind? People that you met or were interviewed by?
Dear Joe, I want to tell you something. Next question. Because I don't talk about specific people, but I want to say something which you mentioned a little bit, which is very important to me these days. I have made it a rule that somebody like me who talks about sex from morning till night, who does not talk about politics, who does not talk about the sex life or problems of celebrities, even if I do know about it. These days I have changed my mind. At the age of 91 and a half, I do stand up to be counted for three things. I am very sad and upset when I see children being separated from their parents, because that's my story and it shows nicely in the documentary. And I'm very upset when the abortion issue is becoming a political football again. And I'm very upset that in a rich country like in America, that we don't have enough funds for family planning, for Planned Parenthood. So I have changed my mind to say we, all of us, Canadians and Americans, have to make sure that there is enough money for family planning and that there is no criminality in the abortion issue, and that things like what happens on the border should not happen in our lifetime.
You've been on record saying that there's no such thing as abnormal between two consenting adults.
Right.
Is there any place where you draw a line?
Look, in terms of the Jewish tradition, we do have a problem, because in the Orthodox Jewish tradition it says that if a man lies with another man as if it was a woman, mot yamut, he should be killed. So I get out of that problem by saying, even today, we do not know the etiology, the reason for homosexuality, and certainly in the olden days, the sages did not know. So we do have to do a lot of educating in terms of saying we don't have answers to many questions. However, we do have some answers to some questions. For example, everybody here at McGill, now in the Jewish tradition it's supposed to be Friday night for married people. Don't just pick up somebody. But anybody here who has a partner, I would like tonight, when you go home, after I sign some books, I would like you to engage in a different sexual position that you have not engaged in before. I want you to call me so I learn something new.
Well, talking about learning something new, today when you were on CBC at noontime, you had a question you said you had never heard before, and a caller asked what was the relationship between music and sex? Was it okay to listen to music while engaging in this activity?
I said, look, you young people are all multitasking. I said, I can't tell you that not to do it. In my way of thinking, if you engage in a good sexual experience with a partner that you really like, then concentrate on that, rather than to also listen to some jazz or even Mozart. However, if that helps you not to worry, will I have an erection or will I not have an erection, then use music. And especially with older people, I have to make that warning that anything that is worrying you should not be brought into the bedroom. And for older people, we see some older people here. For older people, not to engage in sex at night when you're tired, to engage in sex in the mornings, when the testosterone level, which you, the scientists, can explain better, is highest. And it's not true that women don't like to have sex in the morning after a good night's sleep. I want older people, wake up, go to the bathroom, have a light breakfast. I know that your nutritionists have said not to eat or something. I say have a light breakfast, go back into bed. Do know that the erection will take a little longer. The erection is not going to be as hard and strong as it was when you were 18. I'm not talking about you.
Well, I can do the going to the bathroom part.
Very important that people know that that it takes a little longer for older people to obtain and maintain that erection. Everybody has to know that a woman needs to use a lubricant, not to engage in any sexual intercourse with a not well lubricated vagina, because then it's painful and she's going to say, who needs it? And to make sure that if a man has a problem in obtaining or maintaining the erection, first to see a urologist, because there might be issues that are medical issues. A woman who has pain during intercourse, when there is not enough lubrication, first to see a gynecologist, because there might be issues that are not just for a sex therapist like myself and others, but that are related to health and have to be cleared up first. But people have to know that in my way of thinking, I'm not advocating what they did here about men taking younger women. However, I did say, and it became the headline in the Jerusalem Post newspaper, I said, at my stage in life, I'm a widow, at my stage in life these days, I take younger, good-looking men instead of a cane.
Okay. Well, since I'm a scientist, we're going to talk a little geography. Because books have been written about searching for the Gspot.
People, all of you, McGill, that issue of the Gspot, please to bury tonight. There is a book out that somebody wrote that there is a Gspot inside the vagina. Now, inside the vagina, Some women do have more sensitivity at one spot or another. However, nobody has given me any scientifically validated data that there is such a Gspot. And it's terribly worrisome that people are making out of this fantastic activity, sex, or intercourse, or sex without intercourse, problems that we don't have an answer. So until McGill University or somebody else gives me data into my hot little hands that there is such a Gspot, as of tonight, forget about the Gspot.
Okay, we're not going to take a vote on that. Okay, you have said that all couples, of course, have problems, and that these problems should be packaged and left outside the bedroom.
Yes.
Because no one's going to steal them. You can always go back to them, right? And so you go inside the bedroom and you forget about all these problems. Is that realistic?
If you have a worry about your mother-in-law, if you have a worry about a child, if you have any worry, make sure that you are able to leave these problems outside the bedroom door. I promise you, all of your problems that you leave outside, not you personally, you don't have any, but other people, to leave outside the bedroom door, nobody else will take away your package. It'll stay there for the next morning. Don't bring it into bed. And especially when we talk about older people, to emphasize that sex should not be in the evening, sex should not be when you are tired, but when you are together, when you can caress. And one more thing for women, especially also important for in the older years. Let's suppose that he wants to have more sex than she does. People are not Siamese twins. That the arousal phase is not always the same. I want to tell women here a secret. Big deal. Give him an orgasm. It takes 3 minutes, and that's all.
For 3 minutes, well, you're an optimist.
If she wants to have more sexual experience, and it usually takes some women a longer time, go out, get a vibrator, use a vibrator. Women don't get used to a vibrator. No penis can duplicate the vibrations of a vibrator. Use it for arousal and put it aside.
Talking about vibrators, there's a whole new industry now emerging of sexual robots, which are human-sized robots that you interact with.
Look, even those plastic ones that you blow up, I want a real man. However, I don't want people to be lonely, and I don't want them to have that inability to relate, and I don't want them to feel frustrated. So if there's a robot and he can make believe that it's a newfound lover, from my point of view, use it, but only use it in order to be sexually satisfied. Then go out and go to a lecture, go to a movie, go to some place, go to a bar where you can find other people and find a human being. But if in meantime you want to use a robot, use a robot. I want people to have a relationship with another human being. That's what I want.
As the years start to take their toll, people have physical problems. And what happens to a couple, for one reason or another, whether it's a man or woman, who are incapable of having traditional intercourse?
Very important what you said just now, the word tradition. Because intercourse, the whole issue of sexual satisfaction and orgasmic response doesn't have to be a penis inside a vagina. If they can have sexual satisfaction, Mondays she and Wednesdays he, use it. It doesn't have to be the way it used to be when they were younger. So people should adjust to that. People should say, we are older now. They should say how fortunate that we are in this relationship together. and let's make the best. If there is a problem, I'm all for going for a few sessions to a sex therapist. There are sometimes issues that either he or she takes resentments that have nothing to do with sex into bed, like the mother-in-law who was not nice, like any other thing, like worries about children, worries about the job. Make sure that you don't let that interfere with the ability to be together sexually.
Do you think that there are people who are just asexual, who are not interested?
Not in my way of thinking. Now, if somebody says, I really don't need it, I kind of, when you say asexual, I think of if they don't have a partner, masturbating, and people, we have to contradict Freud, because Freud thought that women don't masturbate. Women do masturbate, and women do get aroused by sexually explicit material. So if somebody says, I'm absolutely not interested, I'm a scientist, I'm working in the lab, I don't need sex, I say, have a good life, goodbye. I'm not there standing and saying everybody has to. I'm interested in saying, make sure that you are sexually literate, that you know what is changing, and that you do know to go for help if there is a question with the arousal, if there's a question with not being able to ejaculate, or some other issues. I want to say one more thing that has to do with young children. In today's world, we don't have the luxury not to be sex educators. We have to do sex education. Girls do menstruate at an earlier age. We don't know why. Some scientists think that it's nutrition, but we don't know. But we do have to tell girls and boys about menstruation so that she doesn't go in school to the bathroom, finds blood coming out from a place that she doesn't expect. She will never forget that. And we do have to talk about nocturnal emission, about wet dreams. There was a woman, she was a good mother, but she was sexually illiterate. She did not know about nocturnal emission. She screamed at her 14-year-old boy, what's the matter? How come you don't go and urinate in the bathroom? Why do you urinate in bed? He didn't urinate in bed, he had nocturnal emission. So we don't have the luxury anymore not to be sexually literate.
Annie Hall, one of the great movies of all time, Woody Allen movie. You ever met Woody Allen?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
He even wanted me once in a movie, but it didn't happen. And last week, Billy Crystal wanted me in a movie, but I'm not available that day, so I'm not in the movie.
Because you have to be here. Right. Okay. Classic line from Annie Hall when he says, hey, don't knock masturbation. It's sex with someone I love. Now, I know that you were probably the first person to address this topic on radio and TV. And you have had critics because of that. There was one critic even in the movie who called you reckless. Because how do you answer these critics?
Reckless? I don't, he's not alive anymore, I'm alive. However, I don't want to analyze him. And I said to people who do criticize, I said, I understand your point of view. I didn't get into any discussion. I know that I have to discuss, and I tell you what helped me in this respect in terms of people who criticized. In the Jewish tradition, first of all, sex is called ladat. Ladat, the word ladat means to know each other. That's wonderful. That means to know, which means it already has that notion of having a relationship. Also in the Jewish tradition, there was never any shame attached to issues of sexuality. Of course, in marriage with a husband and a wife, but look for older people, how interesting. The sages knew that even older people, there's a specific instruction. I did a book called Sexuality in the Jewish Tradition with an Orthodox writer, Jonathan Mark from the Jewish Week, The sages knew about the importance of being together, the importance of the relationship, the importance of touching, because they said even after menopause, a husband is still obligated to provide sexual satisfaction to his wife. They wanted Friday night. Friday night they wanted because there's nothing else to do on Friday night. So. But it's very important that they knew about older people. There's another prayer in the Jewish tradition that says, God, protect me in my old age when the forces of my life are waning. So what you do in your research in all of these things is very important because the sages knew of that importance of the relationship.
You've done a TED Talk, and you can find Dr. Ruth's TED Talk on YouTube, which is fascinating. And in there you talk about relationships, and you use the term to compartmentalize. What does that mean?
Yeah, what I meant by that is specifically, don't put everything, if you are angry at that husband because he forgot your, let me say what I had in mind when I talked about that. When Viagra came on the market, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a medical doctor. However, here's what happened in the United States, and I think in Canada. I had said that anybody who can use that blue pill, never to use one of your friend, but if the doctor says you can use it, no problem. Here's what happened in the United States. The man went to his doctor, the doctor said, yes, you can use it. He went, he got Viagra. He now had an erection from the floor to the ceiling. He comes home, he tells his wife, hop into bed, because he thinks it's the last erection of his life. He forgot her birthday. He forgot Valentine's Day. If there was a sports event in the States, for 3 days he didn't talk to her. And all of the women in this auditorium know what that wife told her husband what to do with that erection. And that's the point in terms of relationship, that there has to be some kind of a relationship in order to keep that sex life alive.
Back to Annie Hall. A classic scene where the couple go to the therapist and she asks, how often do you sleep together? And so he says, hardly ever, maybe 3 times a week. She says, constantly, I'd say 3 times a week. What do you say? Okay. How many times a week?
No way of saying that. At some time, it's nice to be together, and at some other time, there are other worries about a child, or there are other worries about disease. There are other worries about a job. Leave it alone for a while. Don't make it into an issue, but make sure that that relationship stays alive and that you have that feeling how fortunate I have somebody who smiles when I come home. I have somebody that I can share my worries with, and I have somebody who is there for me. So I'm very worried about the issue of relationships, and with older people, and also with the millenniums. Because I'm also worried about the millenniums, not here. I don't see anybody on their phone. I'm very worried, and in the book Sex for Dummies, which is here, the 4th edition, I address that, and I'm worried that the art of conversation is getting lost because everybody is on that phone, and we have to be aware of that, and we have to make sure that people have the relationship, because I'm very worried about loneliness.
I'd be amiss if I didn't ask a little bit about your history and about how you got to do what you're doing, and whether or not your early life of escaping from Germany as a child, spending 10 years in Switzerland as an orphan, how did that affect your life, and did that in any way lead to what you are doing?
Well, if you would have told me in Frankfurt am Main, the child of Orthodox Jewish parents, that I would talk about orgasm at McGill University, I would have said you must be crazy. No way am I going to talk about these things. As it turns out, the experience of by chance, having been here at McGill, let's talk for 1 second about that. In November of '38, there was a conference in Evian, and even Roosevelt sent somebody, let's save German Jewry, and that conference failed miserably. The only thing that came out of that conference was that Great Britain, your friends, Great Britain offered 10,000 Jewish children to come for 6 months, hoping their parents would be able to get some place, some country that would take them. Holland, Belgium, France, and Switzerland took 300 children each. I think 7 came to Canada. But if I had been on the group of children, Holland, Belgium, and France, I would not be alive. By chance, I was with a group that went to Switzerland. In Switzerland, I stayed for 6 years, and the children's home that the 50 of us went to, there were 300 children going into Switzerland, became an orphanage. I then went to Palestine. I became a sniper. Watch out what you're asking me. I can still put 5 bullets in the red circle. And I thought that I would be my whole life in Israel, but life came different for me. And the one thing that I did know, I wanted to study medicine. I had no high school diploma. I couldn't go to high school because Jewish girls in Switzerland, in the orphanage, could not go to high school. And now I'm getting an honorary doctorate at Ben Gurion University. Very nice.
It's not her first honorary doctorate,
True.
just the
But
first one in
Israel.
Israel.
But very important, the one thing that I knew, I did not know I would be Dr. Ruth, being at McGill, but what I did know in my innermost, that I had to do something to be justifying that I'm alive while 1.5 million Jewish children were killed. So I did not know it would be by talking about orgasm all day long. Very interesting that I did know that I wanted to be in education. So I thought, I can't study medicine, I'll be a kindergarten teacher. My grandmother used to say I should be a kindergarten teacher. I'm so short, I fit into the chairs. And so I think of myself mainly as an educator. Fortunately, I have that expertise that has to do with sex, but an educator first. I have to tell you something here, because in Canada, when I look at the picture of my 4 grandchildren, 2 of them are Canadians. I have a Canadian daughter-in-law in Ottawa. I have my son, Joe Westheimer, is a professor at the University of Ottawa. My daughter-in-law, Barbara, is a professor at Carleton. So when I look at the picture of my grandchildren, when we did the documentary, I have to say, I have a big smile. Hitler is dead, and my grandchildren are alive.
I know you told me that you have a favorite word, which is done.
Done, but not done yet. I like this audience.
Yes.
Ask a few questions from this audience.
Yes, that's what we're going to. So we are done with our little chat here. And I suspect that there might be 1 or 2 questions. So what we would ask you to do is to line up behind the microphone if you have questions. We also have some questions that I will take that have been submitted anonymously. Mm-hmm. So we will do that as well. And
later I'm going to sign books,
yes,
and you can whisper questions to me.
There we go.
1 second, before we get to the question about sex. Please, people, I'm on the board of the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, all the way down where you can see the Statue of Liberty. And we right now have an exhibit on Auschwitz. We have the car that took Jews and homosexuals and gypsies and disabled people, anybody that the Germans thought are not worth living. It's an exhibit that is wonderful, and I'm telling you, we have to go twice. The first time you're going to be upset. The second time you're going to learn something about the history of the rise of anti-Semitism and of the Nazis, issues that even I did not know. So please come to the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And the exhibit is on for a couple of more months, and very, very upsetting, but very important for those people who are deniers of Holocaust, who say it never happened, and also for those people who have Holocaust fatigue, who say, you know, stop talking already. It's like the Civil War, it's so long ago. And you, because of your evening tonight, when you come to New York, with whomever of your family you come, I will take you myself, but will take a guide, but I'll go with you.
I'm sure. Thank you. Sure that the reason that was triggered is because I'm sure most of you know Fiddler on the Roof. The story is about pogroms in Russia when the Jews were kicked out. And that, of course, is one of the classic songs from it. So that was an arranged marriage. Is it possible to have an arranged marriage and fall in love like they did?
Very important question. The answer is depending on the culture that you are living in. There are still people in India where arranged marriages are done. There are people in our midst, New York, even Canada, where the Orthodox arrange for marriages in order to make sure that their daughters are being married. And in their culture, very often it works out fine. They come from the same background. They know that the whole family surrounds them. They know that they take care of them. They also know they're going to have children. And that's one of the reasons that Jews have survived. So it's not working for people who live like you and me, and who live like, except, look what I did. 2 legalized love affairs, and then I met Fred Westheimer, who passed away 20 years ago already, and I met him skiing, and I decided that short guy, German-Jewish, from educated, intelligent, engineer, and when I went to the room that I shared with a woman that was in the same group of Jewish students skiing, she said, keep your hands off, he's mine. And I said at 2 in the morning, because we talked until 2, I said, let's see, and guess what? You'll see in the movie. Within a year, I married him.
Okay. So, anyone has any questions, you can go to the mic. And I also have a large number of anonymous questions here, which I suspect have been vetted.
And you can always say, a friend of mine at McGill has a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
When is your next book coming out, titled Sex After 75?
First, come out there and get whatever they have here. The new book here is Sex for Dummies, the 4th edition. I did it for the millennials, but there is plenty of stuff in there for older people too. I take all of these questions home. They make up my next book. It will say McGill.
Okay, let's take a live question.
Okay. Dr. Ruth, in my work with individuals who have lost their spouse, very often I hear that they are not interested in having another sexual relationship with a partner. That they wouldn't mind having a friend. They're alone. They're sometimes they've grieved for over a couple of years. They're alone, but they're not interested in having another sexual partner. What is that about?
I would say you have to respect what they tell you. Hopefully they are wrong, but do tell them, at least go out and find a friend. But in this case that you are bringing, they have to find a friend who is also not interested in sex. Because if one is interested in sex and the other is not, it's not going to work. But I'm not on a bandwagon of saying that everybody has to have sex. I'm saying in order to keep that feeling of sexuality and that ability to have an orgasm, if you don't want another partner, even if you have never masturbated, do masturbate. Do masturbate to bring yourself to sexual satisfaction, and then hopefully you will find that so wonderful and so liberating that you'll go out, you go to a lecture, and you find somebody.
Okay, could we bring the lights down a little bit?
Nice.
Okay, what causes sex addiction, and if there is a cure?
I do not know anything about sex addiction. I would say anybody who will come to me and will say that they just have to have sex, I say, here are 3 names of psychiatrists, go and talk to them.
Okay, next.
Hi, the presentation was great. I loved it. No shame here, I'm asking this. How did you get to the position you're in, like in terms of like sex therapy, etc.? Because I'm actually very interested in like going to the same kind of education, I guess.
She's interested in doing the same kind of thing that you do. What does one do in terms of education to become a sex therapist?
No, very important. First, to study psychology, or social work, or a medical specialty, and then to add that way of being a sex therapist in a program that is approved and in a program that is serious and talks about all of these issues in terms of becoming a sex therapist. Then there is an organization that you can get in touch with. The American organization has a Canadian group too, of sex educators and sex therapists. They have specific advice of how to get that specialty.
That's a very interesting question, because you have inspired a lot of people. And we learned yesterday that our own Laurie Betito, who's Montreal's sort of version of Dr. Ruth, followed you, and she did psychology, and that's how she got into it.
And she's not here tonight because she didn't feel good.
I think she's not here tonight because she has to do her show, advising people.
Okay.
Okay, next question. Sex at 50 is not the issue. Beyond 80 is.
Wonderful, how fortunate. You're already 80 and you are still interested. So go out, if you don't have a partner, look for one tonight.
Okay, next.
Hi, Dr. Ruth. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We're having a wonderful, wonderful experience. I'm a marriage counselor and a psychotherapist, and I also write a blog for Psychology Today magazine. And in 2012, I wrote a blog that's called Don't Touch Me, I'm Your Wife. And what the blog is about is how women, very often after the birth of a child, feel as though their bodies shut down and they don't want to be touched. And particularly, they don't want to be touched in the breast, and they definitely don't want to have sex. And as a result of the blog, I've heard from women all over the world. I do counseling with women all over the world who have this issue. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. What causes a woman's body to shut down that way? So that one of the women I heard from, she said, when her husband approaches her, she wants to run screaming from the room. She is such an aversion.
Okay. I could never answer that.
Oh, okay.
I could never answer that. I would have to sit down with you for an hour.
Okay.
I would have to understand much more what the issue is.
Okay.
And then probably I would say that's not the area of a sex therapist, but the area of a psychiatrist.
Okay.
Of exploring what has happened, what was your experience, why can't you get over it? And that would be a psychiatrist. Part of what I did for all of these many years, not only to say go and see a medical doctor, urologist or gynecologist, but very often a social worker, like anybody who has been forcefully touched or raped. I would not give a second appointment. It's not my expertise.
Yes.
I would give 3 names of experts to talk to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What should you do if your partner of 25 years has lost interest in you sexually?
Big problem. You have to sit down once with 2 of them together. You will learn a great deal. And the next time, to take the 1 hour of therapy, cut it in half, see him alone half an hour, see her alone half an hour. You will learn a great deal. I can't speculate. I don't know if there's anger about something that has nothing to do with sex, but that gets brought into the bedroom, or if there are any other issues. When I say about, for example, fantasy, use fantasy, I also use a note of caution. Don't use fantasy of your next door neighbor, because that could happen. So make sure, and I'm old-fashioned and a square, and stand by it that I do believe how important it is to try to work at the relationship.
Yes.
It's amazing having you here, Dr. Ruth. Thank you so much. I work with seniors, especially when they lose autonomy, where they need intimate care. You kind of answered my question about rape or abuse, but when it comes to intimate care, it's always very challenging. How do we talk about taboos when it comes to sexual abuse?
To sexual abuse? Anything that has to do with sexual abuse, you have to use an expert. Somebody who does know how to use that so that it's a productive session, so that something comes out of it that people will say, whatever happened to you is terrible, but let's work on it so that you can live afterwards and form a new relationship. Has to be taken seriously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Interesting question. I'm not sure I understand. It says, why are all religions so against sex?
Hold it. In the Jewish tradition, there's even a special prayer of, I told you that it says when a woman is after menopause, the husband still has an obligation to provide sexual satisfaction, even though it's not for procreation, it's for recreation. And so in the Jewish tradition particularly, anything that has to do with sexuality within that unit that you saw in Fiddler on the Roof is very much welcomed. And there has never been an issue of not being able to talk about it. However, the sages were very clever, and that holds true for some of the things that are happening today. In the Jewish tradition, it says, a man should never be alone in a room with a woman that's not his wife. They knew about the strong desire of sexuality, and they knew that things would happen. So they're trying to prevent it by saying, so even a rabbi who is counseling has to have a window, or has to have the door open, or has to tell his secretary, come make believe that I have a phone call from one time or another. So they knew about that issue of the strength of the sexual desire.
If a man needs to have sex and the woman is not in the mood, the man gets upset. Anyone ever heard of such a story? How do you deal with this situation?
Like I said before, instead of getting upset, instead of having a fight, women, listen carefully, give them an orgasm, 3 minutes, that's all. And the same true for women who might want to have more sexual experience. For men, go out and buy a vibrator, use it on her, make sure that she doesn't get used to it. Because I told you, no penis can duplicate the vibrations of a vibrator.
I'm just going through these questions, and you see me filtering them a lot. It's not that I'm filtering, it's that they're all the same. Because just about every one that I pick up is about what happens if the partner isn't interested in sex. That's most of the questions.
So if the partner is not interested in sex, there are other issues at play. There are other things part of it. It's not an isolated issue, just not being interested in sex. So you have to go and see either a psychotherapist or a psychosexual therapist, somebody that you can openly discuss. When you go and see a therapist, make yourself some notes the night before, because otherwise you sit there and you forget what you wanted to talk about. So make sure, like you go to a medical doctor, make sure and make a list of the things that you want to talk about.
Actually, here's one quite relevant to that. What would you say is the biggest mistake that younger couples make in terms of intimacy?
I think the biggest mistake is probably not to take enough time, because they are busy, the children, they may be still in school, they may be at the beginning of their career, having to put in many hours and not putting enough time. So I'm doing a commercial right now for mini vacations. So you can decide someplace, you call up, and you get cheaper hotel rooms because you call it the last minute, and it's a question of surprise. And then what I do say there is, when you go on a 3-day vacation, that's not just for young people, even gray-haired people, have sex before you go for dinner, because then you know you already have had sex. Then you have a leisurely dinner. Then you go back, you might have another sexual episode, or you go to sleep. But have the sex before, so you don't sit at dinner thinking, am I going to get sex? Am I not going to get sex?
But we just learned that we're supposed to fast for 16 hours. So
I don't know, I'm not going to dispute anything that you scientists say, but you could take a vacation from that 16-minute hour.
Thank you. I want to thank you very much. First of all, I want to tell you I'm a sex ed teacher, and thanks to you, you opened a lot of topics that it made it easier for my job, so I want to thank you. I've been doing this for 34 years, so you made my life quite easy. But the question that I have for you, okay? I love sex immensely, but unfortunately, menopause doesn't like me. So when menopause started, mentally, I love sex. Physically, my libido is gone. And I feel bad for my husband because I'm not interested physically, but mentally, I will still want it. So what do you say to women that are wanting it, but physically, the desire is gone? And it's such a sad, I went to see some gynecologist, and I really hated it because I said, I will like my dryness, but lube, fine. But then I said, but what about my libido? I mean, men are really lucky. They have the Viagra. For us, it's like, what do I do?
Wait.
Okay.
Remember I said before that the sages in the Jewish tradition, how clever they were, because they said that even after menopause, a husband is still obligated to provide sexual satisfaction for his wife. However, if there is an issue like that, to go tomorrow morning, make an appointment with a therapist, and hopefully the therapist will see the two of you separately to find out there might be other issues that have to do with that desire phase dysfunction. Issues of desire phase dysfunction, like the question that we got, I hear very often. Do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to make a scientific comment there about Viagra. Viagra has nothing to do with libido. Viagra is purely physical. You must have the libido to start with in order to make use of Viagra. There are other substances out there that supposedly increase the libido, the aphrodisiacs, but none of those have been shown to
That's
really
for
work.
men, not women.
For men.
Don't forget, I take all of these home.
Right.
I learned something new.
Here's one. How do we still have sex when I have a bad knee and my husband has a bad back?
Hear me clearly? Big problem. Big problem. Don't give up. Go and talk to some people who will find some position that you can use and put the pain of the knee or whatever it is aside and have some good sex.
Yes.
Hi. I have friends with young children, and I always find it interesting when there's always different nicknames for private parts or certain things, because then you kind of grow up with not a stigma, but like it's something that should be mocked or laughed or about. And so I was wondering, how do you tell children about sex, and when? What's the best way?
With young children?
Yes.
Yeah.
When do you tell young children?
You have to do two things. One is I tell parents of young children, check into a motel. You don't have to stay the whole night. Check in for 2 hours or 3 hours, take some bubble bath, take some champagne, have a babysitter at home so you know that your children are safe. If that's a problem, find another couple. From time to time, your kids will stay there or their kids will stay in your place in order for you to be able to have a few hours of uninterrupted being together.
Yeah, she also wants to know when is the best time to start talking to your children about sex.
Very important, you have to be an askable parent, which means I can never tell you the exact time, or age. What I suggest for parents, bring home books. There are books for children about sex. Leave them in the living room. That child that is interested is going to look for it. And make sure that the children know that you are an askable parent. It doesn't matter if it's the mother or the father. That you are somebody that can answer the question, or that you say, I don't know, tomorrow we'll go to the library and we'll find the answer.
Another one,
I want to say something for the classroom. In the classroom, I would like a teacher to have a shoebox with a slit for older children to put in their questions, no names, to put in the question, and from time to time to take the time to answer those questions.
Another one, what to do for lost libido?
I don't know that a libido is lost. Maybe it's going on a vacation. Take it seriously. There are other things happening in that life that have nothing to do with sex, but it's getting played out in that issue of sex, and it is serious. Go for help.
Okay. This is not a question, but a comment. Someone says, I've listened to you and watched you for over 30 years. It's truly a pleasure to hear you in person. Thanks so much for making sexuality a topic which can be discussed openly.
Even at McGill. Thank you so very much.
Okay. Talking about embarrassing situations, it has been our tradition when we end an evening for Lauren to have the last question. And he has always been able to come up with one, all of the symposia that we had. This might be a challenge.
Okay, say a friend of mine.
Well, I guess I could ask a question that sort of combines the two themes we've had over the last two evenings, how to live long and sex. So like, what can you say about the sexuality and prolonging life? Is there any connection between those two topics?
Okay, Joe, come right back here. Hold my hand. Okay, repeat this question.
Okay, what is the connection between living long and having sex?
I can't answer that. You have to get your scientists, whom you make this symposium for every year, to find out. And I think part of it has to do with just luck. Part of it is luck. I'm very sad that my late husband can't see my daughter or my son, both having doctorates in education, the son at University of Ottawa, that he can't see the grandchildren graduating. So there are certain things that we don't have answers for, of what life has in store for us. One thing I do know is the time that we do have, and that's what you are doing with symposiums like that, is to use it the best. I'm going to go out there and sign books. I don't want them to have brought here the book Sex for Dummies and all the others, to have to take them back again. So I want them all of you to get the books.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Dr. Ruth will go out there, so please don't come here, and she'll sign books as long as you want. But before we leave, I think you know that to put on a symposium like this over 2 days with the roundtable that we had yesterday afternoon and last night and tonight takes some effort. And I can tell you that we start working on these 6 months before. And there's a lot of organization that needs to be done. And it's often said that nobody is really irreplaceable. But I can tell you honestly that this symposium could not happen without Emily Shore. Last year I got her flowers. I just forgot this year. It comes with age. But seriously speaking, I mean, the amount of effort that she puts into it and the organization is really, really appreciated. And of course, we also have colleagues in my office who work not only at doing this, but to putting out our weekly newsletter, doing videos that we do. So I also acknowledge Dr. Chris Labos and Jonathan Jerry and Ada McQueen, who work in our office, and again, without whom we would not be able to do what we do. And obviously, the Trottier Foundation, who provides funding for these events. And we will look for suggestions for next year. I'll
come back.
I also should tell you that we have a website where we put on all kinds of interesting stuff. And if you want to write it down, it's www.mcgill.ca/OSS. And there's a weekly newsletter that we produce that shows up in your inbox every Saturday morning at 6 a.m. And it's informative and entertaining. And we have videoed the symposium, and we have videos of all our previous symposiums, which are also available. You can go and check it out there. So please give us a few minutes to locate Dr. Ruth there. She told me that we just plunk her down somewhere, and that's all we need to do, and she will do the rest. So give us a minute to plunk her. And okay, and we will see you next year.